o'clock, so we'll get started. Welcome to meeting number 82 of the House of Commons Committee on Science and Research. If you are online, if you could turn on your camera if you're part of this meeting would be great. And the rest of us just take our places. Today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format pursuant to standing orders. Therefore, members are attending in person in the room and remotely using Zoom. For those virtually, a few rules. You can ask to speak in the official language of your choice. Interpretation services are available for this meeting. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor, French, or English. If interpretation is lost, please notify me right away and we'll suspend until we can get the interpretation services restored. For members participating in person, proceed as you usually would when the whole meeting is in person. Our witnesses are both virtual today. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. If you're on the video conference, please click on the microphone icon to unmute yourself. Those in the room, your mic will be controlled as normal by the proceedings verification officer. But as always, try to make sure your earphone doesn't come close to your microphone so that we don't create feedback in the earphone and cause damage to hearing for the interpreters as well as the members that are participating here. All comments, please come through the chair, and please speak slowly and clearly. When you're not speaking, your mic should be on mute. With regard to the speaking list, the clerk and I will do our best to maintain the consolidated order of speaking for all members, whether they're participating virtually or in person. Pursuant to Standing Order 108.3.1 and the motions adopted by the committee on Tuesday, January 30th and Thursday, February 15th, 2024, the committee resumes its study of the distribution of federal government funding among Canada's post-secondary institutions. It's my pleasure now to welcome Dr. Alice Aiken from Dalhousie University, Vice President of Research and Innovation, as well as Dr. Dina McMartin from the University of Lethbridge, Vice President of Research. You each have 5 minutes for your opening statements, and we'll start with Dr. Aiken from Dalhousie, please.
Thank you. Bonjour. Je suis heureux d'être.
I'm delighted to be with you today, and I would like to extend warm greetings on behalf of Canadian researchers to the committee.
Investment in research and graduate students announced yesterday, so thank you. Canada's universities play an integral role in our national research ecosystem, supporting the development of highly skilled talent, the production of new ideas and technologies, and the transfer of new knowledge and innovations to industry and everyday life. Canada's research-intensive universities, including Dalhousie, are foundational contributors to the pan-Canadian research and innovation ecosystem. We not only cultivate academic excellence and robust collaboration, but also act as vital connectors between academia, industry, and the international knowledge community. Research funding from the federal government is awarded to researchers across post-secondary institutions through a competitive, impartial granting process. These funds support research and talent development at institutions large and small across the country. Research-intensive universities act as research hubs, housing crucial research infrastructure such as labs and highly specialized equipment that support critical research initiatives. By facilitating the development of robust research networks, we ensure Canada's prominent position in global innovation and research while also enhancing domestic capacity. A larger proportion of funding flows to larger universities, in part because of the higher number of professors, the availability of critical infrastructure and equipment, as well as access to talent through graduate and postgraduate programs. The combination of specialized infrastructure and research-focused programming creates the conditions for research intensiveness. As a research hub, Dalhousie University's research projects involve researchers and students across multiple institutions and organizations locally and globally. I'd like to highlight two examples of significant Dalhousie-led research initiatives that, through collaborations with other institutions, industry, and communities, contribute to Canada's economic well-being. The project, Transforming Climate Action, Addressing the Missing Ocean, serves as a standout illustration of how the Canada First Research Excellence Fund, CFREF, underpins significant research initiatives by leveraging institutional capabilities. Supported by a $154 million grant through CFREF, Transforming Climate Action activates a total investment of nearly $400 million in cash and in-kind contributions. The TCA research program is a collaborative effort involving more than 170 researchers from diverse academic disciplines, institutions, provinces, and languages. This endeavor, led by Dalhousie University in collaboration with the Université de Québec à Rimouski, Université Laval, and Memorial University of Newfoundland and Labrador, showcases a strategic use of CFREF to foster world-leading research network. The project focuses on the ocean's critical climate role, leveraging extensive collaborations with Indigenous communities, government, industry, and international partners. I'd also like to speak about the Common Ground Canada Network. Funded by a $2 million SHIRT Network on Sustainable Agriculture grant, this initiative brings together social scientists to share, grow, and apply knowledge about the relationships necessary to transition Canada's agriculture and food systems to net zero. It enables multidisciplinary engagement to ensure the costs and benefits of net zero transition are equitably shared. The network is led by Dalhousie and includes 49 academics and 22 not-for-profit organizations. Our partners are Carleton, Lakehead, and Wilfrid Laurier, and the universities of Victoria, Alberta, and British Columbia. I'll close by noting that research is a resource-intensive enterprise. It requires ongoing investment in people, infrastructure, robust academic programming that supports a steady pipeline of learners at the graduate and postgraduate level, and technical and operational expertise to manage unique facilities and processes. Canada's larger research-intensive universities are particularly well positioned to lead major research initiatives and to act as research and hubs, engaging many collaborators from other institutions. Merci.
Great, thank you very much. And now we'll turn over to Dr. McMartin from Lethbridge University, please, for 5 minutes.
Good morning, and thank you for the invitation to address the Standing Committee on Science and Research. It's very encouraging to see this committee actively inviting voices that represent Canada's small and medium-sized universities as well. For context, allow me to tell you a little bit about my region and why the equitable distribution of research and special initiative funding is so important. Lethbridge, Alberta is a city of 105,000 people and the main service hub of a region of more than 350,000. We're neighbors with the Blackfoot Confederacy, with whom we share close partnerships to the point where our university holds a Blackfoot name, Iniscum, meaning sacred buffalo stone. If you drive through Lethbridge, you'll see the businesses that support Canada's premier food corridor, agriculture and food processing industries. And it also becomes quickly apparent that Lethbridge is a university town, or really a post-secondary town, home to both the University of Lethbridge and Lethbridge College. Our collective students, staff, and faculty have significant economic and cultural impacts in our region. This context is important because community leaders in 1967 understood the importance of a university to the success of the region, of the city and the region. That has not changed, and really it's the same conversation this committee is having today. Our researchers are working on issues that matter to the communities we serve, and they matter to Canada. What's important to our region right now? Water, food security, mental health and addictions, rural and Indigenous health. As a regional university, we're deeply connected to the communities most affected by our research outcomes. We live where we learn, and we affect where we work. The research that happens at the University of Lethbridge is of the highest quality. For example, we undertake neurosciences, RNA technology development, mental health and addictions research by internationally recognized researchers who recruit, train, and work hard to retain fresh talent into our region. Those new talent help to diversify the economy, create new businesses and jobs, improve quality of life, and ensure access to services that are essential when people choose a place to live and raise a family. We are the highest CIHR-funded institution in our category nationally, But even at that, the combined total of non-U15 institutions receive less than 5% of all CIHR funding available. That means enormous stress on our ability to compete for the best grad students, postdoctoral researchers, and faculty. And yet we do compete and we do succeed. Part of how we succeed is through authentic and direct connections with our end users, community partners, and regional priorities. What's relevant in our region is relevant to Canada. A thriving small urban and rural Canada is essential for a healthy, strong, and economically stable country. With all of these exceptional benefits, we also need to acknowledge the challenges of being a smaller university. The growing number of important compliance requirements hit us disproportionately. We have to meet all of the same requirements as our larger counterparts with much lower capacity, fewer staff, single points of failure. And that gap is growing as the requirements increase and access to funding to pay for those needs declines. I want to clearly note that we are supportive of the Bouchard report and also note that special attention must be paid to address inequities. Competitiveness for large investments reinforces the division of access. For instance, with the Canada First Excellence Research Fund, worth multiples millions of dollars, most smaller institutions don't have the staff capacity to compete. We do have the facilities, we do have the expertise, but we don't have the administrative overhead. We can't pull faculty out of their assigned work to focus solely on building those application processes, and we don't have the resources to hire outside grant writers, project managers that create that success. And so we partner rather than lead. But those partnerships and those programs come with administrative and operating funding that gives the lead institution ever more capacity to build to the next successful massive investment. Success begets success, and for smaller and regional institutions, we can't often access that cycle. Recently, some of the larger research funding programs include early stage development funding that really helps to alleviate some of that disparity. And so one recommendation I would make is that all of these large institutional research programs include development funding targeted specifically for smaller universities to level the playing field. This committee must ask, when research funding is concentrated in Canada's largest universities and in largest urban centres, are we addressing the needs of all citizens? Are we properly dealing with the issues that affect all Canadians when we disadvantage geographically located institutions across the country? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. McMartin, and thank you both for your testimonies. And we'll move to our questioning round for 6 minutes to Mr. Lobb, please.
Thanks very much, and thank you to both the presenters here today. My first question is to the University of Lethbridge, Ms. McMartin. Do you think that if we were to kind of go about what you had mentioned, do you think we should go through all the different grants that are provided and look at the results that we're getting first, and then move forward in contemplating maybe leveling the playing field? Make sure we're getting value for our dollars and all the research money invested in the universities?
That's a great question. I think that the tri-agencies and CFI and other federal funding agencies do an exceptionally good job of collecting that kind of data, and the universities ourselves are held accountable both by the federal government and our provincial funders to ensure that we're making best use of the research funds we receive, that we're impacting communities, that we're influencing policy, that we're generating economic activity, creating talent for the future of Canada. And so I do think that we have a very efficient system in terms of the return on investment for research funding across the country. There is always room for improvement, of course, and I think that our current review processes, while extraordinarily robust and certainly internationally recognized and renowned, could still use some improvement in terms of determining where and how those funds are allocated.
Yeah, I always go back to the one I brought up a few times on this committee, and it was the research dollars that were given to study Dolly Parton's lyrics. And I'm sure that there's other ones like that out there, maybe not Dolly Parton's lyrics, but ones that everyday Canadians would wonder why the heck the government is spending money on that. The question I would have for Miss Aiken at Dalhousie University. And it's the one I think probably the smaller, mid-sized universities get frustrated with, is the fact that they're kind of led to believe, or it's kind of put on them, that they don't have the basis, they don't have the staff, they don't have the infrastructure to do the research projects, to quote-unquote play with the big guys. But I always go back to the University of Guelph, and I just can't believe there's another university in Canada that does as much top quality agricultural research as the University of Guelph, and yet they're not in the U15 area. They're not in that gang. So what do we do to level this playing field? Because it doesn't seem right that Guelph would not be considered one of the top research universities, or at least be eligible for doing important ag research.
Yeah, well, I think what you would find is Guelph probably does receive the bulk of agricultural research funding. I mean, right up there with Alberta and Saskatchewan in terms of funding dollars for agricultural research. The U15 group, my understanding, it predates me as a university executive, but it was formed in 2012 in order to bring views of common interest across research-intensive universities to the government. And, I would think we would all recognize that there are many research-intensive universities that aren't necessarily part of the U15. I mean, we see Sherbrooke, we see Guelph, we see Concordia, Memorial, we see lots of universities in that category. So they are all research-intensive universities as well, I would say, based on their infrastructure. But at some point, and I think my colleague Dina mentioned this very well, sometimes it's a size issue. So as we're the smallest of the U15 universities, and certainly some of the non-U15 student body-wise are even a bit bigger than us. So the research intensivity, I think, deals with how you prioritize within the university, within your operating budget. And I do think sometimes the smaller universities don't have the capacity to apply for really large-scale grants. And I'll give you an example. We're all looking at Horizon Europe, and Dalhousie wouldn't consider leading a Horizon Europe application. We'll partner, but we also don't have the size or the infrastructure to lead that. We might see U of T or UBC do something like that, but we wouldn't see another university in Canada have the capacity to do that.
Agricultural.
I can't hear you, sir.
Dalhousie, they receive agricultural research grant dollars?
We do. Yes,
Okay.
we do. We have a faculty of agriculture.
I thought I saw that. So how do they determine then what Dalhousie should do versus what Guelph should do, when you're saying before that Guelph receives the bulk of the agriculture research?
Well, so the vast majority of Guelph's agriculture research money comes from the Ontario government. But I would say also within the tri-agencies, looking at the various tri-agencies, Guelph still receives high levels of agricultural funding, more than we would receive, certainly. A lot of agricultural research, though, is funded through industry partnerships and in industry organizations, the dairy farmers, wheat board. They're a lot of the funders of agricultural research, and certainly are supportive of work at all of the institutions. But, Guelph's a standout in agriculture. There's no question about it. That I don't think anyone would question that.
Okay,
Thank you so much. And as the member from Guelph, I appreciate the conversation around my hometown. I will now turn over to Ms. Diab, who coincidentally comes from Halifax. So over to you for 6 minutes, please.
Absolutely, and thank you very much, Mr. Chair. We'll now talk about my hometown. Just welcome to both of our witnesses. It's actually fabulous to have the two perspectives, but also how they link together. So first, let me say welcome to both of you. But Dr. Aiken, it's great to have you representing Dalhousie. For the record, for those that don't know, it is the only U15 university from the Atlantic provinces. And so today's study is important. We're talking about the distribution of federal government funding among Canada's post-secondary institutions. As well, Nova Scotia has slightly more than 1 million people with 10 universities. 6 have their main campuses in Halifax. 4 have it outside the Halifax municipality. We also have a fabulous Nova Scotia community college system that has 14 campuses throughout the province of Nova Scotia. And I speak from experience. Not only have I lived there most of my life, with the exception of a number of years when I was small outside the country, but I was also the Minister of Labour and Advanced Education provincially at one time. So, it's the fabulous work that's going on there. But in terms of Dalhousie, I just want to also congratulate you, Dalhousie, for launching Your Building Worlds Together campaign that was just launched actually this month, which is Dal's vision. $750 million fundraising push to strengthen student experiences, expand research and its impact, and intensify your service, both local and global communities. And as I said, it is the largest university campaign in Atlantic Canada's history, but also you're the largest university in Atlantic Canada. You've highlighted 2 in your opening remarks, and of the great things that you're doing with universities, throughout the country. Can we go back to just talking about Atlantic Canada and the smaller universities that we have in Atlantic Canada? Certainly, as I said, we've got 10 in my own province of Nova Scotia with slightly more than 1 million people. Can you tell the committee what Dalhousie's relationship is with those other universities, and quite frankly with the community college, just so that we also have that perspective?
Yeah, we have wonderful partnerships with our other Nova Scotia universities and the Nova Scotia Community College. We currently have 52 projects with 70 funders. We have partnerships with all of the universities and the Nova Scotia Community College right now. Some of those are multiple on the same file, but we do take that very seriously. And, we understand that we're a research-intensive university in a province with an outstanding post-secondary sector. And I will give you, Ms. Diab mentioned the ecosystem here. If I can take 2 seconds, about 5 years ago, New York University Business School did a study on the rise of the mid-sized city for the startup economy. And it did a global reach to look at the top 50 startup cities globally. And what they said they had to have is a research-intensive university and excellent post-secondary education for the workforce. And there was only 2 Canadian cities that ended up on that list, and Halifax was one of them. And so, really our ecosystem working together has been what has made us strong. And Dalhousie, we recognize that. We love working with our partners across Nova Scotia and across Canada.
And I cannot agree more.
We can't hear you.
Oh, given that it's budget week this week, I cannot but ask this question. I know you made a comment in your opening remarks of that in terms of what we've seen in the budget with the increases to the value of graduate scholarships and postdoctoral fellowships that we've been studying in this committee since I came to Parliament anyway for the last 2 years, and the major investment in strategic research infrastructure and the creation of a new capstone research funding organization to help advance internationally collaborative, multidisciplinary, and mission-driven research. Can you tell us how these investments will impact the research ecosystem at Dalhousie, but also in Atlantic Canada?
So as my colleague, Dr. McMartin said, we're also supportive of the Bouchard report, and we think that the announcements in the budget on Tuesday were absolutely outstanding. The community across Canada, across Nova Scotia, is extraordinarily grateful for this funding. The funding in mission-driven research, the Capstone Committee, the new Canadian Science Committee that will oversee the strategy, the Canadian Science Strategy. And I think the funding in the granting agencies is absolutely essential as well. I think a rising tide floats all boats. I think all universities will benefit from this announcement. And of course, for graduate students, that vaults us into the league, any league internationally for attracting graduate students.
Thank you very much, Dr. Aiken. I know it made my heart
Great,
and
you.
my eyes tear up when I saw that in the budget, so thank you.
Thank you, and it was great to see the work of all the members on SRSR reflected in the budget. Mr. Blanchet-Chocave for 6 minutes, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Chair. I would like to greet the witnesses who are with us. My first question goes to Madam McMartin. You say your university has expertise for health programs, but because you don't have access to funding, you cannot really speed up those processes and research in your university. We are aware of the very striking data that we've seen. 90% of funds granted to SHIRC are given to the greatest 15 universities. So only peanuts go to the rest of the universities. So I would like you to say something about the data and what you mentioned in your opening remarks, the fact that your development capacity is undermined because you don't have access to equitable funding.
Thank you for that question. I always say I put my researchers up against anyone in this country. We do exceptional work here. We, the phrase is overused that we punch above our weight. We do have incredible facilities and expertise and people. And I would say, our longstanding tradition of being one of the two best universities in the country for neurosciences research in particular is striking. We do more work with dementia, Alzheimer's, intergenerational memory loss issues, whether it's genetic or trauma-based, is very important here. Some of that is hard to get out into the user communities, into the end user groups, in part because we don't always have access to the same venues, avenues, and services that our larger counterparts have. Regardless, we continue to succeed, and I think that's a real testament to the resilience and power of knowledge and the way that the Canadian funding infrastructure system actually has worked for the most part. What I would say is, so the merit review process in our tri-agencies is very, very strong. It is exceptional. The one area that I really struggle with in that particular review process is when review committee members are asked to make judgments on whether there's sufficient institutional capacity for success. When I sign that grant, I'm telling you there's institutional capacity for success. And so I actually think it's inappropriate for people who maybe have never been to my university or don't know my university to be asked to make that kind of judgment. If I'm saying we're going to do it, we're going to do it. So that kind of capacity question, I think, sometimes gets asked in an inappropriate way that, we're asking review members to make judgments that they can't possibly know the answer to in some cases. And that has, I think, led to some of the funding inequities where there's an assessment or an expectation or perception that we just can't do the work we say we're going to do.
Madame McMartin, je veux revenir sur la question.
I'll come back to the issue of access to funding. I want to commend you for all the work you're doing and the expertise you have. You talked about the issues of neuroscience. I would like to come back to what you said concerning the Excellence Fund for Research. And this is a fund that concentrates programs but requires serious preparation before people can apply. Sometimes months and years are required for documents to be prepared and submitted to the government. And you stated that your university, not out of a desire, but because you don't have resources. So what I understand is as if those programs are made to correspond to the needs of bigger universities when we look at what has happened in the past when it comes to research funding. So bigger universities are more able to meet the requirements for that program. What do you think?
That is true. Thank you for raising that again. So what I often will say is that the tri-agencies and the coordinating committee in shifting the way that the CFREF is distributed did open the door to smaller institutions in the last round of applications. The challenge now is I can see the door, but I can't quite open it. And so, as you've said, we don't necessarily have the administrative overheads, the staff, the ability to pull faculty out of their teaching workloads for a year, which is what it takes to pull these together. These are massive grants, and Dr. Aiken will know this in particular, that these take multiple international relationships, partnership building, really strategic thinking. And I think all of the universities in Canada have that ability, have that expertise. We just don't all have the capacity on our staff side to pull it together and make sense. The challenge then, of course, is that when a lead institution receives those funds, they also receive significant overhead funding that provides that boost in project management, administrative supports that can lead to the next big grant. And our challenge has been, if we can't get onto that hamster wheel, it's impossible to become part of that cycle. So once you're in that cycle, it's relative easier. It's not easy, but it's easier to stay on that funding cycle. It's really hard to break in.
Madame McMartin, question rapide.
Quick question for you. We have a government that talks about diversity and inclusion values. Do you believe that those values are being implemented in research institutes in Canada when it comes to organization?
At the organizational level, I think we're still struggling to meet those goals. But yes, I do believe we are all committed and making great strides toward better inclusion, diversity, and belonging.
Great. Thank you for fitting that in. To Mr. Cannings for 6 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, and I thank you to the witnesses for being here. And I'd just like to follow up on my colleague, Monsieur Blanchet-Jonca's question about CFREF. To Dr. Aiken, you mentioned projects in Dalhousie funded through this mechanism, and we've heard some of the concerns from the University of Lethbridge around this. I'm just wondering if you also mentioned capacity issues around applications for large grants and some that you couldn't possibly do. I'm just wondering if you could comment further from your perspective, what would make this better? Would it, if you had a group of universities that received such a grant, would it be better to spread out those administrative costs and benefits from that grant to all the universities instead of just the lead one?
So indeed, that's what we've done, and thank you for the question. The reason we were successful in the CFREF application is, and we didn't lead it alone, it truly was a partnership with Dalhousie, Université de Québec à Rimouski, Université Laval, and Memorial University. And we really, it was a genuine partnership. The administrative costs are split among the universities as proportional to the grant. And so as the lead university, we really just see it as a partnership. And we happen to have had the infrastructure here to be the lead university, but it could have been any one of the four of us because we worked together as a team to build the grant.
Okay, and just another question about, in the budget yesterday, we heard of the new Advisory Council on Science and Industry that was announced. I'm just wondering if both you, Dr. Aiken, and Dr. McMartin could comment on what you think such a council should be looking to do and how that council should be formulated, who should be sitting on that council.
So in my reading of it, if Dr. McMartin doesn't mind if I go first, in my reading of the budget, it was envisioned that it would be academia and industry and not-for-profits that would be there. This reminds me of the old STIC committee that used to be in existence, and to set strategic priorities. I think what would make a difference this time, the STIC, by my recollection, didn't have a capacity to communicate their findings to government. or indeed to the public. So I think what would be really important if you're going to have that makeup of people really looking across all sectors to determine Canadian research priorities, that they're able then to communicate back to those sectors and to make recommendations to government that are based on good data and thoughtful process. So I do think that the model, I think the stick had some advantages, but they weren't really able to communicate. So I would think that would be a big thing for that. And it wasn't a long part of the budget, but I did understand that the three communities would be industry, academia, and not-for-profits.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think being able to have the sector representation, perhaps not single industry, but sector-wide, would be helpful. Same on the same token around, the not-for-profits. I think it's really important that not only that there's regional representation there, but also a diversity of voices at the table from a variety of sectors, some of whom are often not invited to those tables, and able to communicate both at that and then have a voice back into community.
2 minutes, wow. I thought we were almost done. So I guess, Dr. McMartin, I'd just like you to maybe give you more time to flesh out this issue of the lack of capacity. You mentioned being able to access more funds to have that capacity to hire people, to spend the time to apply for these big grants. Just maybe if you could spend more time on that.
Sure. If you don't mind, I'll use an example around healthcare and graduate funding. Again, we very much like Dr. Aiken mentioned, we're very pleased with the announcement around increased graduate funding in the federal budget. One of the areas we've been looking at, along with many other regional institutions with the U15, is building out our rural physician development programming, right? So that we're training people where they will work, where they will live, and really living that live where you learn model. And those relationships, those partnerships are essential. They're very important. Part of what that does around research is it also means that the research is taking place in the region where we can see opportunities to create new ways of looking at, in particular, say aging in place in smaller centers, where we can see the direct impact of working with Indigenous health challenges, the social determinants of health, issues around mental health and addictions that I think sometimes you see being done at the larger institutions, but being at the community face really makes a difference around being able to do that evidence-based research with community. And I think we can do it a little bit faster in some times because we do have very strong community relationships and trusted partnerships.
Great. Thank you very much. And now to Mr. Tucker for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you so much to the chair and to our witnesses for being here today. I've got a series of questions for both universities. Regarding the research of your respective universities carry out, do you track how much of it has been commercialized?
Yes, we do.
Yes, we do.
How has that been tracking? As in, has it been trending up, flat, or down?
Ours has been trending up, for sure.
Ours is,
in terms of number of patents, number of startups that we've grown and supported, IP.
Yeah, and similarly here, we're seeing a significant growth in commercialization, startups, subsidiaries, and a lot of particularly graduate student enterprise being grown out of the university. We provide an incubator space for them on campus with the support of external agencies and partners, and sort of give them a couple of years of support, and then slowly move them into a more market appropriate cost structure.
Yeah,
To do with
we do the same.
The commercialization aspect of it, is this, I'm assuming this is another revenue source, and in general, have you guys been moving away and diversifying yourself away from government for some of the funding that's taking place on your campuses?
So we are one of the currently on the first stage of Lab to Market. We're one of the partnered national leads with Toronto Metropolitan and Concordia, though we have lots of good partners across the country, 33 to be exact. And we have found that some other sources of funding have helped our graduate students to commercialize, but we've also found that the business community are very generous with their time to help our graduate students learn about business development and growth of a business. So we also are one of the hubs of the Creative Destruction Lab. So we move right through all areas of commercialization. But I will also note, we have a wholly inventor-owned IP policy. We don't retain any of the IP that our people generate.
And the University of Lethbridge is the same. We don't retain the IP, and so our goal is to ensure that we've actually reduced the barriers to get information, get technologies, get new ideas, innovations out into the entrepreneurial landscape rather than attempting to sort of keep it inside the ivory tower. And so that means that, yeah, we're not replacing different revenue streams. In fact, we're encouraging revenue generation in our community rather than within our institution.
Exactly.
Just speaking about the communities and life on campus, can you discuss the impact of the out-of-control cost of living crisis that is happening on your students and the research in respective universities?
I can go first. Alice has been good about going first on several other occasions. Given the affordability crisis, I would say there's actually an opportunity to really support the regional and smaller institutions. We don't have the same housing availability issues or affordability challenges that you might find in some of the larger centers, at least not yet. It is expensive to live. Inflation is high. It's been coming down, trending down for the last little while, which has been extraordinarily helpful. But, it's any of those questions is a confluence of issues. There's not one single challenge that goes into affordability. And so it's access to adequate federal, provincial, municipal funding. It's ensuring that students do have access to the bursaries, the scholarships, and the food security that they need. And I think food security on campuses right now is a particularly challenging issue for all of us to keep in front of our top of mind.
Shout out to Dalhousie in a second, but just on the food insecurity, have you heard students having to use the food bank?
Very much so. And in fact, we have expanded our food bank on campus, as well as having fresh food days, nutrition days, and there's a significant amount of effort going on.
I'm sorry,
on
I
our
just
campus.
missed that. And this is one of the first that I've heard. You have an actual food bank on campus?
We do, yes. And I think, in fact, most universities do these days.
That's unfortunate in a country as wealthy as a G7 country that we have students not just accessing food bank, but seemingly the system is set up that there's free food on campus.
Okay. So now we're going to go to thank you for the questions, and I know the University of Guelph, the Food University, also has a food bank on campus and participates in the local food banks. Mr. Turnbull for 5 minutes, please.
Great, and I remember going to Carleton University here in Ottawa about 25 years ago where we had a food bank on campus that I had to regularly use as well, which is, not uncommon for students who are struggling to go to university. Anyway, it's great to have the witnesses here. Thank you for that. And really appreciate your testimony and the expertise that you're providing for this study. I wanted to ask, given the fact that Dalhousie is one of the members of the U15, I wanted to ask a couple of targeted questions around, how the U15 may operate as sort of anchor institutions that may actually help increase capacity to do research among other universities. And so I just wanted to see if Dalhousie plays that role in helping and partnering and collaborating with other institutions to perhaps supplement their capacity to do research in key areas. So Ms. Aiken?
Yeah, thank you. So we absolutely do that, and I gave you a couple of examples where our partnerships are wide-reaching across all spectrums of universities, and including in our own province with numerous smaller universities and a wonderful, robust community college system. So we believe that partnerships strengthen us. We encourage partnerships, and we encourage working together to grow research capacity, commercialization capacity, and the overall ecosystem. And I think most universities do the same thing. I did just want to note one thing about the funding for universities with medical schools, though. The hospital amounts are also included in our CIHR grants. So when you think of University of Toronto with 10 hospitals, they, of course, seem to take a lot of the money, but a lot of that goes directly to the hospitals. But we partner well with the hospitals as well. If physicians want to do research, they need to be appointed at a medical school.
Thank you for that. Appreciate that, and understand the importance of having those research institutions support a lot of our health professionals in having placements in hospital settings. UHN downtown Toronto is particularly known for that with the 4 hospitals. Anyway, I won't get into that, but I wanted to perhaps pivot to a question about applied research. We had some of the colleges and polytechnics, and in fact, one of the local institutions in my riding, Ontario Tech, which operates, it's a university, but it operates in particularly STEM areas where a lot of the research is applied. And there were some witnesses that had suggested that perhaps we should allocate, or the Tri-Council should be allocating a larger portion of research dollars to applied research rather than academic research, and that colleges should be given eligibility or made eligible for those funds as well. I wondered what the both of the witnesses today, Ms. Aiken and Ms. McMartin, how you feel about that. And maybe I'll go to Ms. McMartin first, and then Ms. Aiken.
Sure. Thank you for that question. As Dr. Aiken has said, the partnerships, the collaborations are key here. And so, as I mentioned, we have Lethbridge College in the city of Lethbridge as well, close partners with us both on academic and research programs. We do work very hard to not compete, but rather to complement each other. And so we have complementary facilities, complementary expertise. They do different work than we do. And so there is a different funding stream and a different approach to the way that research is funded. Our applied research doesn't have special funding available to support it. And their fundamental research doesn't have special funding to support it. So I think there's been a bit of a division of labor there through the funding councils that so far has been relatively successful.
Okay.
And I would agree with Dr. McMartin, and I would note that all types of research are important, from basic to applied to community driven. And we, as research institutions, we all need to be thinking of all of those types of research. One of our biggest successes is in applied research in our partnership, the only university partnership in the world with Tesla, and the battery work we do, the lithium-ion battery work we do. And that is all applied research. It's very important to us.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you for the questions.
I would just say, Chair, just as a closing remark, that I really think the applied research seems to get a lot of impact, direct impact in the economy, which is fantastic. Not to say that academic research isn't
Mr.
also very
Blanchet-Choquin
much
for 5
important.
minutes,
Thank you.
please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je vais poursuivre.
Thank you, Chair. I'll continue with my questions for Madam McMartin. I would like to hear you tell us what recommendations you are recommending to help small-size universities access equitable funding.
Thank you for that question. I have a couple of recommendations. One is around, we've talked about enhancing merit review, and so really ensuring that when institutions declare capacity and expertise to do something, that the merit review committees accept that. Also to provide opportunities for faculty members, for researchers who are coming into the research game a little bit later, that there isn't a detriment to to joining that stream as a mid-career or established faculty member on our campuses. I think that we also want to ensure that this new funding for graduate students is distributed appropriately, fairly, so that research trainees do have access to funding at all of the institutions so they can choose where they want to study rather than having to go to one of the larger universities because that's the only place they can get funding. So I think it would be important for us to look at, again, as part of the affordability crisis, how can we ensure that students can choose to live in smaller, more affordable centers and still get the same quality of expertise and research experience that they're seeking.
Just to interrupt, I had said 5. I should have said 2.5. You have about a minute left in your round. Thank you.
And then, as I said earlier, I think development funding that's targeted to help level the playing field for the smaller institutions. We've been very, very pleased with the support, and Dr. Aiken mentioned this around the hub model for research cybersecurity and research data management. That has been very, very successful because we do not receive enough funding to do that on our own. And so either we need more funding to do it on our own, or there have to be strings attached to the funding that goes to the larger institutions to ensure they provide those supports to us.
Merci, Madame McMartin.
Thank you, Madam McMartin. I have a few seconds left. I would like us to talk about the Excellence Fund. There's a lot of funding concentration that mostly go to the U15 group of Canadian research universities. And the rest have to share, and they share only peanuts of that with small universities. What do you think?
Very briefly, please.
I think there's an opportunity to continue to improve that program so that smaller institutions do have equal access.
Great, lovely. Thank you very much. And Mr. Cannings for the last 2.5 minutes, please.
Well, thank you. And I'm going to turn to Dr. Aiken again. Just with this discussion around affordability, one of the big aspects of affordability for students has come about because governments of all stripes and provincial, federal have, the support for universities in general has been declining over the last 30 years. So tuition fees have gone up. Students these days pay 10 times what I paid as a student back in the late Pleistocene. And also housing costs have gone up, and I think this is clearly what's driving some students to food banks. But I'm just wondering, with the smaller universities, colleges that we've been talking about in this study, is this somehow a silver lining in that where in smaller centers, students don't have as much of those costs, so you can attract some pretty good talent through the students that are coming to you because of those reduced costs?
Yeah, thank you sorry, was it for me or Dr. McMartin?
It was for you, but if we have time, Dr. McMartin can answer as well.
Okay, thanks. I think so. We've seen in Halifax an incredible increase in housing costs, and we also have a food bank at Dalhousie. But as Ms. Diab mentioned earlier, not all small universities are in. I mean, Halifax isn't a big city, but there's other smaller universities here who are hit with the same impacts. And I know one of your colleagues who has UOIT in his riding, and that is also in the Toronto corridor, an expensive place to live. So I just think generally it's very expensive to live. I would very much like to applaud the announcement for increasing the graduate student funding. I think that's going to make a massive difference for attracting high quality talent to our universities. And I think your graduate students generally aren't staying in residences that are still affordable. So as we have residence space for undergrads and increased funding for graduate students, I do think it will help universities of all sizes.
Okay, sorry, that's the end of my time apparently.
Yeah,
Thanks.
Thank you. We aren't quite at the top of the hour. I did have one question myself that Dr. McMartin, you mentioned about mental health and the work going on in Lethbridge. I noticed that you weren't your university hadn't been part of the Canadian Brain Research Strategy or Brain Canada, and wonder about the distribution of funding impacting joining networks like that in Canada that might be able to help further the work you're doing.
Yeah, that's a really important question. We partner at the individual faculty member level, so we do have partnerships with the Prairie Hub on Brain Canada, and I'll be frank, the funding that the federal government announced again this week is very, very welcome. This is important investments in ensuring that there is support for mental health for students, staff, and faculty. This is a universal challenge across the country. This isn't just us, but students are becoming the young adults who will lead the country in the future. We want to make sure that they have the best chance to do that as stable, resilient citizens.
Thank you. Tremendous. I really appreciate your thoughts on that. And thank you to Dr. Alice Aiken and to Dr. Dina McMartin for your contributions this morning and your participation in the study on the distribution of government funding among Canada's post-secondary institutions. If there is additional information that you'd like to share, please do direct that to the clerk, and the analysts can use that as they prepare the report for us. So we'll suspend for a minute or two while we go on to our next round, and thank you again sincerely, and to the members for some great questions this morning. For those on Zoom, you can leave now, and we'll get our next panel set up. So I'll suspend just for a minute or two.
Thank you.
Thank you.
second part of the meeting. Welcome back. Pursuant to Standing Order 10831 and the motions adopted by the committee on Thursday, January 30th and Thursday, February 15th, 2024, the committee resumes its study of the distribution of federal government funding among Canada's post-secondary institutions. It's now my pleasure to welcome as an individual Vincent Larivière, professor from Université de Montréal. See, we have Céline Passelin de Raucourt from the Université de Quebec, Vice President, Teaching and Research via video conference. We could start with 5 minutes from Monsieur Larivière, please.
Merci beaucoup de l'invitation.
Thank you very much for inviting me to testify on the important issue of the concentration of research funding. My name is Vincent Larivière. I'm Professor of Information Science at the Université de Montréal and holder of the UNESCO Chair in Open Science. I'm not here representing the Université de Montréal, but rather I'm here in a personal capacity as an expert who has been studying the Canadian research system and specifically the organization of its funding for the past 2 decades. The first point I would like to mention is that there's an institutional and individual concentration of research in almost every country. It's become like almost natural. I mean that everywhere, a minority of individuals, so research institutions, are receiving the majority of the funding. I would also like to mention that Canada concentrates its funding to a lesser extent than the other countries. This is illustrated by success rates with granting agencies that are generally higher than those observed, for example, in the United States, where it's extremely concentrated, particularly in natural sciences and engineering. So our approach here could be described as unconcentrated. In short, there are two approaches to research funding. One, they focus on excellence, where fewer people are funded, but with larger amounts of money. Another approach is focused on discovery, where more people are funded, but they receive small amounts of money. So with the first approach, it is based on the assumption that there will be economies of scale in the system. This means that a lot of money is given to a few people, and there will be more collective benefits, and knowledge production will be more efficient, a bit like in an individual context, where an industrial context where you produce at lower cost when you produce a lot. The second approach, discovery focus, assumes that there will be diminishing returns when there's funding concentration, and giving more money to researchers or institutions that already have a lot will result in lower marginal productivity, and there's diminishing returns. So many studies have been carried out to find out whether one of the two approaches produces more collective results. So is it concentration or diversification? At the Canadian level, research at the individual level has shown that concentration of funds leads to diminishing results. Giving research funds to individuals who are already highly funded results in a higher cost per research article or research work. And that is what we've seen in Canada, and that's what we've seen in work that has been done at the international level. So the situation is not too bad in Canada and in the world when you look at the impact of concentration. So I am delighted and pleased to note that changes that in the budget we have amounts that go to individuals. Now let me come back to institutional funding, where we fund less. We know that research is concentrated. We know that 5 institutions collectively receive more than 45% of the funding from the 3 federal councils. We also know that the U15 universities have collectively obtained around 80% of the country's funding throughout the country, and that has remained the same for the past 20 years or so. But we don't know. And over the past few weeks with my team, we're trying to see what new data we have on the impact of institutional concentration. So I carried out an original analysis looking at the Canadian universities. I looked at all the fundings from the tri-agencies, SHIRC and SEC and CAI, and I looked at all the scientific output as published by scientific articles in those universities. And we're trying to see whether there will be diminishing returns or increasing returns. So what we've seen, both for individual research and others, it's changing. For natural sciences, medicine, we have diminishing returns on an institutional scale. In universities with more funding, the cost of research is a lot higher than in universities which receive less funding. So there are no economies of scale when funding is concentrated, but rather diminishing returns. We could also argue that they have better quality research in the big universities. When you look at the quality of the work, we also realize the same type of diminishing returns. So the higher quality is not what should explain the fact that research should be more expensive. So I'll rapidly conclude by saying that in terms of public policy, the goal is not to suggest taking money from well-funded universities and giving it to less well-funded universities. This would produce the same kind of diminishing returns. We are talking about better understanding the level of institutional inequality that helps to generate the most collective benefit. We also know that there are inequalities. So what level is unacceptable, but which helps us to produce more collectively?
That's the last part of your thoughts there, and I'm thinking if your report was available to us in the next 30 days, maybe we could include that in our deliberations of the report that we'll be looking at through our analysts.
It will.
Thank you very much. If you could send that to the clerk, that would be very helpful. Now, if we can go to Université du Québec from Céline Poncelin de Rocoeur, and sorry about my French. For five minutes, please.
Merci beaucoup. Merci.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for inviting us to take part in the committee's work on this very important issue. The Université du Québec network is booming, and its research community boasts a number of niches of excellence in areas of strategic importance to Canada. Taking the environment alone, our research teams have developed internationally recognized niches of expertise in the role of oceans in climate change, for example, clean technologies, green energy, and the sustainable use of natural resources. More specifically, we are working to reduce flood risks, increase resilience to forest fires, speed up circular economy strategies to prevent and manage health problems linked to pollution or environmental deterioration. These successes have not been achieved thanks to the funding system, but in spite of allocation conditions that are often unfavorable to our researchers. As Mr. Larivière has just said, the phenomenon of concentration of research funding is well known. Institutionally, funding is concentrated in U15 institutions, the vast majority of which have medical schools and are located in major urban centers. These institutions receive almost 80% of funding, while accounting for 59% of graduate students and roughly half of all faculty. On an individual level, around 80% of research grants go to the top 20% of funded researchers. This means that 80% of the academic community share just 20% of the funding base. This situation is not the result of chance, but of systemic biases that favor larger institutions with medical schools. The logic of this system is simple. Past subsidies attract future subsidies. From merit scholarships to major grant programs and Canada Research Chairs, the entire system is designed to reward institutions and researchers less for the potential of their research program for society than for the awards they have already received. We need to break this vicious cycle, first of all, because it's a poor strategy for allocating public funds to a limited number of institutions and researchers. Research, as we've said, has shown that the concentration of funding produces a diminishing return when measured in terms of number of articles and number of citations. Beyond a certain financial threshold, investments no longer have the desired effect in terms of scholarly production. The true measure of the research community's productivity lies not in the amount of money an individual receives, but rather in the number of individuals at work. So it's by funding a greater number of researchers that will increase the system's productivity. Putting all your eggs in one basket reduces the chances of innovation in Canadian research. All the more so since the low success rates associated with a high concentration of funding encourage conservatism in the academic community. Not only is a concentration of funds a misguided strategy for supporting discovery, but this public policy also poses problems in the terms of economic development. This is because small and medium-sized establishments are woven into the economic and social fabric of their communities. They train a highly qualified workforce, and their research focuses primarily on the environment, populations, and social issues of their region. Yet, these establishments are currently disadvantaged by the federal funding system. A similar observation can be made for the country's French-speaking community. Since 2004, the share of total research funding allocated by the federal government to Francophone institutions has been declining. Francophone researchers now receive a smaller percentage of funding than their demographic weight. I beg your pardon. If Canada is to maintain the vitality of its communities, it is imperative that these establishments receive more funding. So, of course, we agree with the recommendations of the Bouchard report to significantly increase research funding in Canada. And we'll also commend the budget announcements made this week talking about the increase in excellence awards, for example. This is a response to representations that have been made for years by our community, and by our community. And this would ensure a better future for the Canadian research. But injecting more money into the system won't make it work any better if we don't also change the rules that govern it. If we want to break the vicious cycle in which the Canadian research community is trapped, we need to distribute funds more equitably. To this end, we have made a number of recommendations in our brief. For example, that the budgets of the three councils be increased to support their core granting programs, and that the budget increase take into account the proportion of researchers and graduate studies, that the budget increases enable researchers to increase the value of the scholarships they pay out to students through their research grants, and that the government increase the number of graduate scholarships.
And any other recommendations that we don't get to? I know if you could support us by sending them in writing, that would be great. And now we'll go to our questions, starting off with Michelle Rempel-Garner for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to direct my questions to the University of Quebec, and apologies for my anglicized self, so I'll be asking my questions in English. I'd like to talk about kind of a sensitive issue. Removing barriers to equality of opportunity to allow diverse individuals to access federal research funds is a laudable goal. However, the Government of Canada has faced some controversy in Quebec on this front by applying certain eligibility criteria to the allocation of federal research funds within the province. In late 2022, a history professor at Quebec Research Institutions filed a human rights complaint against Laval University and the Canada Research Chair program alleging discrimination. His argument was that he was qualified for the position of a Canada Research Chair in history, but his application was not accepted because he's a white male. In response, in December 2022, Quebec's National Assembly passed a motion that expressed a commitment to merit-based hiring on its university campuses and rejected the imposition of racial or gender quotas by the federal government. All of this is related to the Government of Canada's Canada Research Chair program requirement that universities meet diversity targets in hiring. So I'll ask you if your university believes that the federal government should be able to apply these types of requirements on Quebec-based institutions.
Merci beaucoup, effectivement.
Thank you very much. Your preamble was very good. It's a very delicate question in the university community that is disturbing many people. The answer I'll give you is that all university institutions, and together with granting institutions are concerned about ensuring inclusion, diversity, and equity, taking into account the profiles of researchers and students. For example, for the Université de Quebec, it was designed historically to enable the access to groups that were underrepresented in university circles or research circles. So students, for example, who were first-generation students, people who were older with families. So we are used to receiving great diversity of students and researchers as well. So the attempts, or I should say the concern by university institutions, is to promote a system that is as equitable and diverse as possible. It would be wrong for us to get into a debate instead of ensuring this diversity. I think that will be running counter to excellence and merit.
Should the committee recommend that the federal government continue to include the specific exclusion of certain genders, ethnicities, or sexual orientations as an eligibility requirement for the allocation of federal funds?
En fait, il ne s'agit pas d'exclure.
It's not about excluding anyone a priori. It's all about making sure that the processes take into account the diverse realities so that indeed people have a fair chance of accessing funds and demonstrating their merit.
So if I'm summarizing what you're saying correctly, it's that the committee shouldn't be recommending that anybody be excluded from federal funds, but that we should be looking at effective ways to remove barriers of equality that barriers to equality of opportunity that some communities might face, rather than taking an exclusionary approach in terms of eligibility criteria for the allocation of federal research funds. Would that be a correct characterization?
Je pense effectivement.
I think that today's rules do not ask for exclusion of anyone. There are situations where people have to go further looking into criteria to provide places for others. When a system is concentrated on certain profiles and you want to allow room for other profiles, sometimes you have to change the equilibrium. So some measures have to be taken. So the rules are not really based on exclusion a priori.
Do you believe that the province of Quebec should be able to set priorities for the allocation of federal research funding for research institutions like yours, or should it be simply the federal government?
Je pense que le Québec a.
I think Quebec is lucky to be able to rely on a research ecosystem called the Quebec Research Fund. And the coexistence of the two systems has always been a winning situation, a win-win situation for Quebec and also for Canada. So there is great complementarity between the two systems. And for the time being, I don't have any concerns when it comes to the current functioning.
So the setting of provincial strategic research priorities in alignment with federal research priorities has been successful for your institution as a Quebec-based research institution.
Very briefly.
Oui, effectivement.
Yes, indeed. We have several researchers and communities members who work on things that have to do with Canada's issues. And we know that everything that concerns Canada also concerns Quebec.
Ms. Bradford for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you so much to both of our witnesses. So starting with Mr. Lavière, you indicated that the concentration of funding leads to diminished results based on the research that you've done and worldwide. And you indicated that the cost of research is higher in the larger universities and the quality of research is not any better. Can you give us your thoughts on as to why this might be?
Merci beaucoup pour la question.
Thank you very much for the question. I'll try to rephrase to be very clear. what we've seen in organizations is that indeed the cost of articles produced increase when the university is globally funded. The theories we have to explain the diminishing returns. The first one, and this was mentioned by my colleague, Ms. Poncelin de Recourt, to produce more, we need more researchers. As a professor, I have a limited number of hours per week. We have only 24 hours a day for everyone. So now, if I'm given more money, I will not necessarily do more work. The money has to go to someone else who doesn't have the money. So to discover more, we need to, of course, give significant sums of money, but we need to fund more people, and this would help discover or produce more research work. In the case of a large university, giving a subsidy of $100,000, for example, is just a drop in the ocean. But giving that amount of money to a small institution could make a great difference.
Thank you. Turning now to Ms. Poncelin from the University of Quebec. You indicated that many of the U15 universities tend to be located in areas, large urban centers that have medical schools. So they tend to get a lot of research dollars just because of that focus. We heard from an earlier witness on the previous panel, and she was from a smaller university like University of Lethbridge, that it's like a hamster wheel. You're trying to break in as a smaller university to get into maybe, the larger grouping with a bigger pool of resources. And I was wondering if you could maybe elaborate on your thoughts as to how universities can attempt that. It is difficult to do the grant writing, et cetera. I know in the budget that we produced the other day, the number of graduate scholarships has been increased, and you indicated that was one thing that could help address this. Can you give us some other suggestions?
Oui, merci.
Yes, thank you. Let me come back to the recent increase in the number of the value of bursaries and things that we are delighted about, things we have to be vigilant about, the distribution of those new funds. If the new funds only helps to further concentrate, we will not be improving the system. A year or two ago, we had some discussions with the granting agencies, and they said that most graduate studies are funded through bursaries that are provided through the grants received. So for the bursary program, we'll have to make sure that the new scholarships are equitably distributed, not depending on the quotas related to the success rates of the research, as is the case today, because some of these institutions have the greatest quotas, and that's why there's concentration of funding in the same institution. So we have to break with that logic. So I think the Canadian Association of Higher Studies had recommended an equitable distribution to graduate studies students. And most of the students that are supported by supervisors through the grants should be better supported by also increasing the subsidies given to the three councils so that they can increase the grants that go to the basic programs. That's for bursaries. Now, how can we discover more? There's the issue of the funds made available to institutions to meet the needs and to be able to take part in essential partnerships. In small institutions, you have reduced teams that have to cover an unbelievable number of programs. We know the rules. And sometimes they have to do what they can to help research teams to carry out ambitious programs with very limited time. So we have to make sure.
I just want one quick, my time's almost out. I just wondered if you could give us an idea how master's and doctoral students fund their studies at institutions that receive less research funding. just quickly, because I
Very
know
briefly,
I'm
please.
out of time almost.
Quand ils sont pas subventionnés,
When they do not receive subsidies through bursaries, they are forced to find jobs on campus or outside campus. And this takes away time, and this has a negative impact on their perseverance and certification.
Blanchette Jocas for 6 minutes, and thank you for getting these witnesses to us today.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Je salue les...
Thank you, Chair. Greetings to the witnesses who are coming to be with us during the second hour. My question goes to Ms. Poncelin Durecourt. During your opening remarks, you said that the funding that goes to Francophone institutions is lower when compared to its demographic weight. I would like you to tell us more the effects of funding concentration of funding from the federal government and its impact on the Francophone institutions. Yes, indeed. The Université du Québec is concerned, and this has been the case because of the decline of the French effect in Canada, particularly in the scientific domain, where this decline is particularly remarkable. You must have seen a lot of data that was published on the fact that since the 60s, only 8% of reviews were in French. In natural sciences and engineering or health, there's actually almost no option to publish reviews in French. 90% of the reviews are in English. There's only 5 to 12% of applications that go to the granting agencies in French. Historically, success rates for French applications are lower than when compared to English. So I could go on and on to show you the inequalities. Now, to answer your question, take, for example, the U15 institutions. Only 2 are French-speaking, and none of them gets the UQ, whereas Université du Québec is well known, and they have to share peanuts. To summarize, in the Canadian context, research in French is crucial for the vitality and fulfillment of Francophone minority language groups, communities. The Francophone communities, for them to be able to live well, they have to develop their own knowledge, and the most appropriate language to do so will be French. They also have to train highly qualified professionals in their language through research. Institutions establish ties with other communities to be able to serve them well. So that's a danger when funding is concentrated. Thank you very much for your answer. I'll continue with you. We've often heard the U15 universities say that the Canadian evaluation system is mainly based on merit. And this is something that is quoted throughout the world. What do you think about this? We are not questioning the integrity of people who take part in the merit review process. The evaluators and administrative staff all work ethically, and they respect the ethics and values of the granting agencies. What we are questioning is rather the choice of public policies that encourages the concentration of funding, particularly through funds that are designed to mostly fund a small number of projects, programs that give points to researchers and institutions based on the amount collected in the past, or depending on the means or resources deployed, and which is mostly tied to research and not the excellence of the program. When merit is less associated to past research than the amount already received, we lose sight of the objective, which is to improve the conditions of living of communities. So we need to change this way of doing things. The value of research for a researcher cannot be measured by looking at the amount of money received, but we should look at the impact on the community. That's what we need to look into. Thank you very much. Next question goes to Mr. Larivière. Today, you said something very important. The argument of the U15 group is that they have research-intensive programs, they have the expertise required, and they have the talent right there. So you talked about the deficiencies in investment of public funds, and you are saying that it does not necessarily generate more productivity when it comes to impact on research. You even talked about scientific productions. I'd like you to say more about that. What you said is very true. So basically, what the data has shown is that the production of articles is more expensive in universities that have more. So now, some reasons may explain that, which should be reviewed scientifically. So we have results that are very interesting. So we need to understand the situation more. So we need to study it more. As I stated before, with these results, we need to look into the situation more to try to find out what are the factors that explain the situation and what is the distribution that is inequally optimal within the country so that we can maximize benefits. And as Ms. Poncelin de Roucault has said, we need to make sure that we have knowledge or know-how on different segments of Canadian society. And all this starts with diversification of research centers.
Very much. And now for Mr. Cannings for 6 minutes, please.
Well, thank you, and I'd like to continue on with Dr. Lariviere to talk about that issue of, this case of diminishing returns. If we want to expand the number of grants provided to Canadian researchers, especially to smaller institutions, there becomes a point where you get this diminishing return because if you have such a small grant that the researcher really can't do the research, it would be basically a waste of money, I would say. Mm-hmm. So I'm just wondering if you have any, I know this seems preliminary, your results, but if you have any idea of what a rough minimum grant would be, and I know it might differ between research fields, but where do you think that lower limit might be?
Merci beaucoup pour la question.
Thank you very much for the question. Very interesting reflection. In Canada, we have NSEC, which has a funding model that is very different from that in the other funding agencies and elsewhere in the world. So NSEC funds a proportion of researchers at higher levels than in other domains. The amounts are lower, but still allow a professor, for example, to have a postdoctoral intern and so on. It enables the person to have a small team. So NSEC provides the funding base. If we could find a minimum amount, I think the example of NSEC is right there for us to copy. So we have examples here that are working well.
You think the NSERC model would work better if it was copied in SSHRC, for instance?
I said we need to explore this model because in social sciences, we often say that social sciences is less expensive because we've decided to pay students at a very low price. But there's no reason that justifies the fact that a science student should be better paid than a student in social sciences. A while ago, we told you how students survive when they don't receive funding. And it's the case for many social and human sciences students. Even in the large universities, they have to find work outside the campus and so on. And this hardly happens when we're talking about medicine or natural sciences. So the NSEC model, in my opinion, will be interesting to explore now. We will need to increase the budget of the NSEC,
Okay, to Madame Poncelin de Roucault, can you comment on that as well? You talked about the need to provide more funding to more researchers. Where might that limit be, if you could expand on that?
J'irais effectivement dans
I would say what Mr. Larivière said, talking about the NSEC model is something we often look into, trying to have a reasonable percentage for the community, the research community that is supported, to have a success rate that encourages innovation instead of it being an obstacle to innovation and research. We also need to look into how community research communities are supported at the beginning of the career, in the middle of the career, and at the end. So these are all things that we need to look into. Now, in addition to the money received, we also need to look at the resources that go to the institutions. As we said, researchers or research teams can do their work more when they are supported by support teams. So we are thinking about laboratory technicians, for example, and these are very precarious jobs, whereas they are essential to help continue research projects and help to maintain infrastructure, whether it's in natural human resources or human resources. Human and social resources don't have infrastructure. Now we have artificial intelligence and so on that is necessary in this domain. So the fact that a researcher has to be supported by an ecosystem, a team, research professionals, laboratory technicians, and also admin staff, all these people need to support them to prepare their granting applications so that they can focus on research. Let me give you an example with the National Research Security. The federal government has allocated funds to support institutions to ensure research security, but the way that the money was allocated promotes funding concentration because it's based on what is given by the three councils. And the University of Toronto received enormous amounts of money, whereas other universities had been asking for this funding for a long time. They received nothing, or sometimes they received only $2,000 to be able to do what they needed to ensure the safety of their research. And this is a case where we have money that is inequitably distributed and it constitutes a burden now for smaller institutions, whereas the larger institutions continue to receive a lot of money.
Mr. Soroka for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start off with Ms. Poncelin de Rocour. In light of your focus on optimizing resource allocation, what sustainable funding models has the University of Quebec developed to reduce dependency on federal funding, and can you please provide examples where these models have successfully supported research and teaching initiatives?
Je suis désolée, est-ce que vous pouvez juste
I'm sorry, could you please repeat the question? My translation didn't work, so I was still waiting to listen to the interpretation. Could you please repeat, and then I'll answer your question.
Pause the time.
Thank you. In light of your focus on optimizing resource allocation, what sustainable funding models has the University of Quebec developed to reduce dependency on federal funding, and can you provide examples where these models have successfully supported research and teaching initiatives?
In the Université du Québec's network, we have an increasing proportion of research that is done in partnership with other domains. Out of the total amount, about 40% of funds come from private partners or from organizations. So this is an increasing trend. And this is explained by the fact that our institutions are based in their milieu. They work with the communities and they are funded by these communities. So that's one example.
peut-être un autre
Maybe another example is that we kind of join forces when it comes to our efforts and resources. We try to come together to be able to reduce expenses, but that's not the solution. Every institution should be able to have its own resources to deal with its issues. Each institution should be agile.
Okay. Given the initiatives pursued at your university, such as digital competency and mental health projects, how do you measure and report the returns on investment and funding bodies, and what has been the impact of these initiatives on both student and outcomes and broader academic contributions?
Effectivement, on a
For about a year or two, there's been a major initiative for all universities at the Université du Québec, which is called the Mental Health Institute for Initiative for Graduate Students. Thanks to the fact that we work together, we have come up with this initiative that sought funding from the government of Quebec to improve the mental health of our students. And this initiative has enabled us to pool resources while supporting mental health interveners. And there were also resources going directly to students in the network. And the initiative was so interesting that the ministries asked us to also serve the Université du Québec community, but also all the universities in Quebec and the cégeps and colleges. So that's one example of an initiative. Now, when it comes to the impact on mental health, unfortunately, these are new initiatives, so it's difficult for us to tell you the impact as you've requested.
How do you ensure that utilization of federal funding at the University of Quebec maximizes return on investment, particularly in terms of research output and educational quality? And what are some of the key performance indicators that you use to evaluate the effectiveness of these funded projects?
C'est sûr que chaque
Every institution in every ecosystem needs support for knowledge to be transferred. So there are patents, startups that flow from that research, social innovation that is usually less assessed but just as relevant, and it's being improved. We're starting to improve the review process for this. There's also partnership research. By its very principle, it would not necessarily generate any patents, but just the fact that there's a collaboration with industry and so on. So the objective is to have a concrete impact in the communities with which we carry out research to address certain issues. So the number of partnership-based research could be one way to assess the impact on the communities in Canada.
And now to Alina Jasic for 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair. D'abord, je veux dire...
First of all, I would like to thank our witnesses for your presentations today.
Is looking at the distribution of federal funding amongst Canada's post-secondary institutions. I think we've all agreed that the pie needs to be expanded, and this is why we're so pleased that our government has introduced the budget, which of course will be subject to a confidence vote, so we are not going to take anything for granted, but the proposal obviously is to increase the pie in terms of research dollars. But I want to concentrate on practical solutions as to how this amount of funding should be distributed. And one of the suggestions that I've heard from a researcher was that when the Tri-Council look at applications for grants, that those applications be blinded. In other words, there is no sign that an application is from a U15 institution or any other, that it isn't necessarily part of the application that the previous publications of a particular professor focused on. What do you think about a possibility of blinding the review panel to the actual institution that is applying. Can we go to Professor Larivière first?
Ouais. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much for your question. Literature has shown that reducing the weight of the identity of people applying leads to greater equality in the results obtained. So now, to answer your question, the answer is yes. It's something that should be explored. We have very interesting results for Canada. A study by Holly Whitman, who is a professor at the University of Laval, showed that when the weight of the CV was reduced in assessments and greater weight was given to projects, there was no longer any gender inequality in the success rates in the results obtained. So by analogy, we can think that this may also reduce the weight of more prestigious universities when compared to the less prestigious universities. So yes, I totally agree that either we anonymize projects as much as possible, or in the case of the funding for professors, we give greater weight to the projects and less weight to the CVs or resumes of people applying.
Madame Poncelin de Rocourt, vos pensées?
Ms. Poncelin de Rocourt, your thoughts, please. I would go along with what Mr. Larivière has just stated. These are things that need to be explored. We need to go further and rethink the criteria for assessing the quality of a work. For example, in the job description, lots of details are requested, or proofs of concept is requested concerning the environment of the researcher. And this places a lot of weight on the infrastructure of the institution that is not at all related to the quality of the project being carried out by the researcher. So these are things that need to be reviewed. Asking a researcher, for example, to talk about their most relevant publications that are related to the project, and this leads to voluminous documents that may not be relevant to the project, and this is cumbersome for teams. So I think that there are lots of avenues that we can explore. So the excellence criteria need to be reviewed.
Thank you very much. We did have a suggestion at our last meeting from the Canadian Association of Graduate Students or Graduate Studies, that perhaps the allocation, again, talking about redistribution, practical suggestions, should be based on, in fact, the number of students in that institution. Do you feel that that might be helpful as well?
Very briefly, please.
To Dr. Larivière.
Très rapidement.
Very quickly, that is something to be explored. The key word here is that funding agencies must be ready to experiment with new ways of granting funding. There's an international trend. The Europeans are doing it, the Swiss National Science Foundation is doing it as well. They are talking about even looking at the profitability of randomizing funding, because they realize that peer reviews are imperfect.
That in, and Mr. Blanchet-Jocquin for 2.5 minutes.
Monsieur le Président, je poursuis pour...
Thank you, Chair. I'll continue with Ms. Poncelin. You talked of studies that... You talked about the funding right now. Could you please tell us more about that, the current system?
Oui, tout à fait. Donc,
well, talking about the reality we have now in the Quebec, Université du Québec system, concentration has a direct effect in the capacity of the university to develop, their capacity to attract others, and and the funding of their operating cost, because most of the operating cost of universities comes from the student population. So they can receive less students because of the quotas system, and this has a direct impact in the development of the university, on the development of the university. So that's the vicious cycle that I mentioned. Less research funding, less researchers who receive funding, less students in the graduate studies, less students, less operating costs, less teachers, less teams, and so on. So that's the vicious cycle that I mentioned before. Thank you. I'll continue with Mr. Larivière. Could we observe any effect in funding of research in Canada? Because the mechanisms through which scientists, the most recognized scientists, say there's no problem because they receive most of the funding. They want to maintain their domination in the domain of research and technological innovation. Yes, there's a Matthew effect, because the more you have visibility, the easier it is to receive more. So the richer you are financially, the more funds you receive. So it's not only something we've seen in Canada. We see this everywhere, as I said before. So now what I would like us to do is to look into ways of ensuring greater equity in the system to make sure that we do not lose discoveries that could have been done but are not funded. Mr. Larivière, in terms of discovery, some scientists say that the most revolutionary projects, in light of the current system of funding, will not receive anything. It's true that the peer review system is considered very conservative. If we have ideas that are more revolutionary, it's likely that those funds will not be awarded. Inaudible for the interpreter. So are you saying that there are some discoveries that could become Nobel Prize winners? Of course, unless they receive funding to do so.
Mr. Cannings for 2.5 minutes, please.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to turn to Dr. Poncelin de Rocourt again. And yesterday in the budget, we had an announcement of a new advisory council on science and innovation that would be responsible for a national strategy to guide priority settings and increase the impact of federal investments in research. I guess my question would be, if you were on that council, what would be your first a bit of advice that you would give the government on how to best change our funding system for science and research in Canada?
Maybe the first thing is that if you were to be a member of that council, it would mean that what we're saying would have been heard, because one of the recommendations we are making in the brief we'll submit is that such committees should have a composition that takes into account the diversity of the research community in Canada. So institutions that are regionally located or a different type of institution should be part of those committees so that different voices can be heard. So that will be the initial good news. Now, in the recommendations, I think that the issue we've been discussing a while ago, making sure that we provide adequate funding to the entire research ecosystem, that is what is going to help respond to the issues so that all specificities and issues are addressed. And I think that that will be the impact. So make sure that there's equitable funding, fund more researchers so that we have the most agile and innovative system.
30 seconds, sorry.
30 seconds. Well, thank you. And you, my second question would be on the makeup of that council. So you kind of answered that off the top, but if you want to expand on that in 20 seconds, I'd be happy to hear that.
These are elements that other communities have raised. I think we should know that in such organizations that will provide advice to Canada, there should be a diversity of universities, different profiles of people who will take part in those strategies. There should be a diversity of voices and greater reflection. We need to make sure that there are different sizes of institutions, different regions are represented on those councils.
Thank you very much. We've come to the end of our questioning, but just my comment to both our witnesses was your excellent answers on very short notice, like zero. You were able to get complex questions answered in a remarkable way. So thank you for providing your excellent testimony to Vincent Lariviere and to Céline Poncelin de Rocourt. And again, anything in writing that can help our study. The members are doing a great job getting us the information for the analysts through you. We have come to the end of the 8th hour of this study. It's a 12-hour study, so we have 2 more meetings coming up when we return from our constituencies in the coming weeks, and we'll continue the study at that point. So thank you again to the witnesses and to the members for this morning's session. And with that, we'll look for an adjournment. And I see it. So meeting adjourned until next time. Thank you.
Merci. Au revoir.
Thank you. Bye.